Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Lawrence Freeman. Now, he's coming all the way from DC. So yes, another round of applause, folks.
Greetings to all. It's very nice to be here. I got a call about a week ago from Kofi, and he says you have to come up and speak at our conference. So I have a great affection for Africa over many decades, and therefore I rearranged my schedule, drove up this morning around 7 o'clock. I am very pleased that you're forming a political movement. I've belonged to a political movement for most of my adult life, the LaRouche movement. And we formed our magazine, Executive Intelligence Review, in the 1970s after we became a little more politically sophisticated. I became active in politics in the late 1960s, so some of the more mature elderly people in here will remember the 1960s was a time of great ferment. And since then, I've continued to be active now for about 45 years. I've been involved in Africa for the last quarter of a century, studying it, writing about it, and visiting Africa probably about 25 times over the last few decades. So that gives you a bit of introduction, and Mr. LaRouche, the founder of our movement, has been providing economic, political leadership, not only in the United States and around the world, but also in Africa, where I've represented him at various conferences in Nigeria and Sudan and other places. So what I would like to discuss with you today, though, is the essential questions that's facing all of us here in the United States and elsewhere around the world, which is that we're in the midst of a very great crisis right now. And the financial crisis is dominating politics throughout the world, including the wars that we're involved in, which could escalate into much greater wars. I mean, essentially, we have a financial system dominated by the Western banks in London and Wall Street that are bankrupt, that are filled with debt that cannot be paid, and therefore their system doesn't function anymore. So this is a monetarism. It's a cancer that is destroying our economies around the world. And you'll see this is not just the case in Africa, though it's the worst case. This is happening in the advanced sector. And this system right now is on the edge of collapsing and could collapse even over the days and weeks ahead. So we need a new paradigm. We need a new way of thinking. We need a new policy that will unite nations together and provide a common interest of mankind for the benefit of all our people. Right now, there's a real deficit in leadership in all the countries around the world, and a deficit in ideas. Ghana is very close to my heart because Kwame Nkrumah is one of my heroes. And he had a vision for Africa and a vision for the world, but a vision for Ghana and Africa primarily. And this never really fully took place. His ideas were incorporated into the Organization of African States in 1963 charter. And he said, quote, "Our responsibility is to harness the natural and human resources of our continent for the total advancement of our people in spheres of human endeavor and a commitment to progress and using our human resources." That was never done. It was done for a period of time under his leadership, but in a sense, it was never completed in Ghana or in Africa. Well, African nations, well, that was part of it, but it was also MI6 and others. African nations have not been allowed to develop and realize their potential because there's a conscious policy to keep countries underdeveloped, not just the people of Africa, but for mankind. And we are facing a gigantic battle where you have a financial oligarchy, who we could call in Greek terms Zeus or Satan, that oppress economic development. And then we have the Promethean faction, the god who gave mankind reason, and fire, which represents those people around the world who are patriots and want to defend and develop their country. That's the battle that we're involved in right now. The truth is that Ghana and Africa and all nations on this planet are being oppressed by a financial oligarchy, dominating the city of London and Wall Street. We're seeing now in Europe, if you look at Spain and Portugal, what is being called the Africanization of Europe, where people's economic living standards are declining, unemployment is skyrocketing, medical equipment is not allowed because of this excessive quality of maintaining this bankrupt financial system. One of the things that I think is important that I can give to you from my experience in this movement is that there's two things I come to realize which I'll pass on to yourselves. One, especially when you're dealing with a small group, you have to have a strategic view of the world so that you understand the flow of events that are occurring dynamically across the planet. And two is you have to present an actual positive vision program for the future of your country so that you can actually unite people together around a common purpose for your nation. Each nation should have a mission, and that mission should be part of a global effort where all countries are benefiting. It's in philosophy going back hundreds of years. There's a Nicholas Akuza said in the 1400s, the maximization of each individual nation leads to the maximization of all nations. The Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 came up with the idea, was the founding of the nation state concept, that a benefit to thy other is a benefit to thyself. Mankind has a natural interest in developing each other as their own self-interest in developing themselves. But I want to give you a case where this financial system right now is targeting countries around the world. And I give you a case not of Africa, but I give you a case of Argentina. Now, you may know that there's a battle going on right now in Argentina, or may not. Because what happened is Argentina reorganized their debt, and they went bankrupt in 2001. They couldn't pay the debt. We're familiar with that problem. They reorganized their debt, and they worked out with their bondholders to take a reduction in the bonds, and they reissued new bonds at lower rates, which they've been paying off for the last 8 years. And during this period of time, they've been also growing their economy so they could pay their debt. Just recently, one of the major hedge funds, NML Capital, a hedge fund, which bought the debt of Argentina at a very small rate. They bought $48 million of bonds, but they demanded the full price of the bonds. So they bought them when Argentina was selling them cheap for renegotiation, and now they want the full price, which is $850 million. So it's almost 2,000% increase. The courts of the United States have backed them up, including the Supreme Court. So now there's a battle between the MLL hedge fund, representing the financial sharks of the world, the predators, the vultures, against a sovereign country led by Cristina Kirchner in Argentina. And I'll just give you an idea of how they're fighting back. This is an ad that Argentina took out in the Washington Post on last Wednesday. Vulture funds. Facts show they are really vultures. And this was taken out by the government to defend itself against those who are trying to destroy its sovereignty. And see, that's the problem, the policy right now. That Nkrumah, even though he had the idea and fought for it during his time he was president, Ghana now is in rough shape. But all the countries in the world are in rough shape, and all the countries in Africa are in rough shape. There's no great success stories because national sovereignty was never allowed to be fully developed in any of these countries. And the motivation of this is this financial system, which denies the right of the creative individual to develop him and herself in the process of changing the universe, changing your country, changing the planet, and actually intervening and changing the universe. And they have various games they play to suppress people. Like the environmentalist movement says, there are too many people chasing after too few resources. So we have to reduce the world's population by several billion. And they start with Africa. Now, Africa, I've flown over Africa many times. I'm sure many of you had. Africa is underpopulated. It is not overpopulated, it is underpopulated. Africa is underdeveloped, and that's a conscious policy that the British had, and they've maintained. First it was done by British colonialism, and now it's done by neocolonialism from the financial system. The World Bank, the IMF, the World Trade Organization, these organizations suppress and prevent the development of these countries. The same NLM hedge fund that's attacking Argentina is doing the same thing in Africa. They bought up debt of the Congo Brazzaville for $40 million, and they demanded payment for $400 million, and they succeeded. So they paid $40 million, and they got $400 million. Look at that, where could that money have gone for hospitals, for schools, for medicine, for food, for infrastructure? So these financial predators are dominating the world right now. And they've always been the enemies of mankind, and they were the enemies of Africa and of Ghana. And I think that people should realize that the lack of development, especially infrastructure development, is the most important factor in countries progressing. I just came back from Sudan last month in June. And it's clear that the sanctions policy by the West are killing Sudan. And Sudan has the potential to be a breadbasket for Africa. There's enough land, fertile land, to feed over 700 million people. And if Sudan and Ethiopia combine together their energy resources, water and land, you could eliminate hunger in the in the Horn of Africa. This could have been done 20, 30 years ago. It was not done because it was deliberate. Now, Kwame Nkrumah represented a different point of view. He went to school in the United States, which overlapped completely the administrations of Franklin Roosevelt. And he got to see the United States actually fighting for an American system economic policy under Roosevelt, as opposed to the British free trade colonial policy. And he wrote back in 1963 in his book, Africa Must Unite, quote, "States emerging from colonialism faced a gigantic problem of transforming their almost purely trading and raw material producing economies into productive units capable of a superstructure of modern agriculture and industry. We all, African countries, have a similar dearth of capital, trained labor, and technically skilled personnel to assist us in our development." He goes on to say, poverty is progressively reduced only as productivity increases and industrial progress increases, and part of our surplus can be available in increased wages, better housing, and generally improved conditions. He goes on to explain, all industries of any major economic significance require a basic facility, a large and reliable source of power. Newer nations like our own, he's writing in 63, which are determined to catch up, must have a plentiful supply of electricity if we are to achieve any large-scale advances. Our real wealth comes from increased productivity. Now take a look at this question of electricity. I disagree most of the time with my government and with the Western powers. President Obama has a program called Power Africa. It's a farce. He said he's going to double access to electricity in Africa. 600 million people go without electricity in Africa. Approximately 400 million have access to electricity. So the double, you're talking about bringing on another 400 to 500 million. Power Africa is supplying a private backing of lending to major corporations to the Exim Bank for 8,000 megawatts of electricity. Divide over 6 countries. That's nothing. That won't even, that'll maximum handle 20 million people. Africa right now is the most deficient continent on the planet in infrastructure and especially in energy. United States, we average, all of us in this room, about 10 kilowatts of electricity available to us. It should have been 20. In Africa, it's a half a kilowatt. Africa has 70,000 megawatts of electricity for sub-Saharan Africa, but South Africa has 40,000 of it. So there's 30,000 available to the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. But there's no reason for this. This is a deliberate suppression of development. So when these heads of state meet, as Congressman Marango was saying, and he's a fine congressman, he's probably one of the best in the country in representing his people, but this summit right now is not going to give anything to the African people unless we actually change the agenda. And you have to have energy, you have to have rail line connections, and you have to have water management. There's no shortage on the continent of the capability to grow food. There's projects all over Africa. I was in Mali, and I discovered something I'd not seen before, which is, you may not know it or may. Inside Mali, there's a delta of water. It's inside the country as opposed to Nigeria where it's on the ocean. It's called the Inland Mali Delta. It has the potential to fertile, wet land, naturally irrigated. 2 million hectares could produce 2.5 million tons of rice. And 100,000 hectares is developed. This is a conscious policy. Instead of people in the West complaining about human rights, why don't we feed people so they can actually exist and be alive? But this is not the policy of the IMF and the World Bank. One of the most productive periods of U.S. and Africa relations was John F. Kennedy and Kwame Nkrumah. And when Kennedy, as a senator, supported nationalism and development in Africa. As soon as Ghana became independent and Kennedy became president, they formed a very close relationship. And you may know that Kwame Nkrumah was the first head of state invited to the United States and given a state dinner by President Kennedy. I think that was in April of 1961. Kennedy helped make the Volta Dam project possible by helping to arrange $180 million in investment. That dam, when it was upgraded, produces 1,100 megawatts of electricity and was part of a whole industrial complex for the aluminum industry, which Kwame Nkrumah saw as a potential for changing West Africa. Yet today, Ghana has barely doubled the amount of electricity. It's at 2,100 megawatts and had 1,100 megawatts in 1966. This dam and the progress that it represented in potential was seen by the British and the financial oligarchy as detrimental, because they saw if Africa developed industrial and agriculturally, they could not control it, not manipulate it, not have access to the resources. So when this complex was finally finished, there were efforts right away, as this process was going on, plans were being already made to carry out a coup against Kwame Nkrumah. Because Nkrumah wrote, quote, "The Volta River Dam involves the production of hydroelectric power by damming the river and applying great volumes of resultant cheap power to convert our bauxite resources into aluminum and to provide electrification to the nation's other industries." At the ceremony of the dam, which was December 1965, we believe the amount of energy which can be generated in Ghana can play a decisive development in our industry, agriculture, health, and other resources. Certainly the foundations for the effective and rapid industrialization of our country rest on the provision of cheap and abundant energy. Now, I think that Kwame Nkrumah was virtually removed from power in February 1966, and the dam was completed in December 1965. So, coincidence in timing. And the New York Times came out with an editorial on February 25th, 1966, a day or two after Nkrumah was couped while he was in China. And the editorial said the real danger is not getting rid of Kwame Nkrumah, which now he has left. The danger is Nkrumah-ism will live on in the fight against neocolonialism for a united Africa. Now, Unfortunately, Ghana has not reached its full potential. If you look at where it was in the 1960s, you look at the bauxite potential, iron ore in Ghana, this should have led to a steel industry already, plus all the ore that exists to the west on the border of Sierra Leone and I think Liberia. This was never developed. Ghana also was involved in the first nuclear atomic energy reactor test for teaching Ghanaians about nuclear energy in 1961. As soon as Kwame Nkrumah was couped, 2 weeks later, the atomic test reactors was dismantled. Ghana should have had nuclear energy by now. In fact, the whole continent of Africa should have nuclear energy. We should not simply rely on hydroelectric energy. So aside from gold, and now we've discovered oil, bauxite, magnesium, iron ore, all the potential was there for not only Ghana to develop as a country, but for the whole, it was seen in Nkrumah's mind from his writings, this was going to be the key for West Africa. Not Nigeria, which I love and I've been there many times, but Nigeria was not seen at that time as the source of development of West Africa. It was actually Ghana. Now, Ghana faces problems today that are very severe, and all of Africa faces, and the world faces. Because if you look at the question of youth population, out of 25 million people, or 26 million people in Ghana, 57% are between 24 years and younger. If you look at the continent, the predictions I got in Washington at a meeting I was at yesterday was that by 2050, there's going to be 2,400,000,000 Africans, and by 2050. 700 million will be youth 30 years or less. Right now, there's a jobs deficit in Africa of 122 million people who are eligible to work, and there's no job, and we know that doesn't even count the informal economy. So how are we going to deal with this? How is Ghana going to deal with it? How is Nigeria, which has 177 million people, how's the continent going to deal with this if we don't have real economic growth? And I don't mean the statistics from the IMF and World Bank that claim 6 out of 10 of the fastest growing countries in Africa. It's not true, it's a lie. If you measure economics in physical wealth, energy per person per land area, food availability, the number of rail lines, the amount of water, the number of product per hectare of food produced, Africa is not growing at the rate that these statistics produce. And it's not growing anywhere near the rate that's going to deal with the question of this huge population over the next generations. So what we need, and this is my advice, my humble advice, having been involved in this now for several decades, I just turned 63 in May. I think what is required is we have to develop a vision for the future. We need, if it's your organization, we need leaders and people who are going to say, where does my country have to be 20 or 40 years from now? A truly great leader, and I count John F. Kennedy as one of them, and I count Nkrumah as one of them, and in my mind, same period of time. A truly great leader thinks 2 generations and says in his mind, in his imagination, or her imagination, where should we be? How much food should we have? How much energy should we have? How much rail transportation should we have? And then goes back in time from the future to the present and says, okay, today, what are my policies that will get me there? And we have to put these forward now as individual countries, but also as groups of countries in Africa. And you have allies. Whatever the complaints are about China, and I know what they are, China is moving in a different direction. They have just initiated an Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank. It's called AIIB, and it's going to be capitalized at $100 billion. They are involved in the most massive production of nuclear energy and rail production that the world has ever seen. It's called the Silk Road Policy, and the current president, Xi Jinping, is a very forceful leader in this direction. In the BRICS You know the BRICS conference is taking place next week in Brazil. Now everyone will get rid of the World Cup and go into the BRICS. They're going to set up a development bank, an infrastructure development bank. Africa has to become part of this because infrastructure will never be paid by the private sector. The sharks and the predators and the vultures, they're not interested in building anything. They're interested in controlling and extracting a pound of flesh. So the question is, who's going to build the infrastructure? The railroads, the nuclear energy, the water projects. It's going to be states have to build them. The state has to initiate its own public credit, not go to the World Bank, not to the IMF, but now potentially to these industrial infrastructure banks that are being set up. And the countries say, okay, what do we need for our region? And this is what leaders, qualified visionary leaders, should do. Now, I read in some of your literature you're thinking about in some way intervening into the new election in Ghana in 2016, is it? I think one way of intervening is to put forward a program, a visionary program for Ghana and for Africa, and put that program in front of the people of Ghana, and take that same idea and unite with other countries in Africa, natural allies that can work with you, and natural allies outside the continent that can work with you. Until we change the Western financial system, there's going to be no real development coming from the West for Africa. I can guarantee that. I don't care what Obama says at this summit, it's not going to happen. Because there's no intention of developing Africa. There hasn't been one since the death of John F. Kennedy. Now, I just want to leave you with a couple of slides if Kofi's here. Kofi has some slides. I guess he left. Oh, could you put up the slides on the program? Where is he? Oh, here he comes. Because what we're going to need is we're going to need sovereign governments uniting together for a common purpose across West Africa, across the African continent, but Africa to the rest of the world. And I want to just present you with some ideas that my organization is working on that can give you a taste of what is possible. As soon as I just have 4 slides and then we can. I go to the, Kofi, if you can go to the 3rd one first. Okay, that's it. This is what we call the Eurasian Land Bridge. This is the Eurasian Land Bridge. Mrs. LaRouche, a leader of our organization, put this forward 30 years ago. And the Chinese are moving in this direction, which is you connect the world through corridors of infrastructure, rail, energy, water. Now, China is already doing it. If you look on the east coast of China over here, which is the population, they're already moving across Europe, across Asia. And their development bank is open to the European countries, which if they're smart enough, they'll take advantage. Africa, you can see we have 2 points where Africa links up to this. One is the Morocco, Spain, where the tunnel has already been studied. It's feasible. It could be built. So that would connect northern Africa, or there's one over there on the Sinai. There's a 3rd one between Tunis, Tunisia, and Italy. So you have a northern trunk line. Then you go down to Central Africa. Africa then connects into Eurasia. Eurasia connects through Russia across the Bering Strait, which is only 30 miles, to North America, Alaska, and down through the United States into South America. We could connect the major continents around the world. This would be a revolution in economic development. The amount of science and technology required would spur more engineering schools, more scientific development than we've ever seen. Okay, now if you can go back to the first one. First one. One more. Yeah. This is the East-West Railroad. This has been known, if you go back to the Marchand, when he was crossing across West Africa, and Kitchener went down to Fashoda to wipe him out to make sure the British maintained control of the East Africa. So this has been around, known for at least a century, that you could build a railroad. So that one starts in Port Sudan and ends in Senegal. This would revolutionize West Africa. Chad, Niger, Cameroon, Nigeria, Ghana, Benin, Senegal. Imagine if you had a high-speed rail crossing the width of Africa, the millions of tons of freight, the manufacturing, the electricity, the jobs. When I was in the Niger Delta in Nigeria, I looked into the face of these young men. They're angry. They don't have anything in their lives. They don't have any hope. Their rage is coming out of them because they've denied the opportunity to be a productive human being. We could put these young men to work, and we could change the way Africa functions. The next one? Sorry? Okay, give me 2 more minutes, I'll be done. Okay, this is a conception that was developed by an Egyptian engineer. It's called the African Pass, and those lines go to the top of North Africa, down all the way into Central Africa, water and rail lines that would connect a major portion of the continent. Next one. Now this is the last one. This is my baby. We discovered this in my organization in the 1980s. This is a plan to take 5% of the water runoff of the Congo River, send it north in the canal to the corner of the Central African Republic, and then across the Central African Republic to River Chari and refurbish Lake Chad, which is now disappearing. This would transform Central Africa, stop the desert, increase fishing again for at least 4 or 5 countries. This was studied in the 1980s. These are doable projects, but they're long-term, low-interest investment is necessary. 2% 25-year loans, which governments can give. The private sector and the private banks never will. So this is a taste of the future, but this future can be the present. And this is the way to deal with the youth bulge and the economies in Africa. And I would suggest to your young movement that you take up the challenges of putting forth these kinds of visionary, transformational programs for Ghana and for Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Freeman.